The day 2 FBI agents knocked on my front door, I honestly thought they had the wrong house. I had never been arrested, never been sued, and I had never even received a parking ticket in my life. So when one of them looked me straight in the eyes and asked if I was Daniel Carter, I smiled without thinking and told him I was. He opened the file in his hands, compared my face to the photograph inside, then quietly said something that completely destroyed the life I thought I knew. According to federal records, Daniel Carter had been legally declared dead almost 10 years earlier. Before I tell you how that happened, I'd really appreciate your support. If you enjoy emotional, true story style content inspired by real events, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. And before we begin, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from today? I genuinely enjoy seeing how many different countries these stories reach. Now let me tell you what really happened. My name is Daniel Carter, and I grew up on the south side of Chicago with my younger brother Michael. We weren't just brothers, we were best friends. We shared a bedroom until high school, played baseball every summer, borrowed each other's clothes, and somehow always ended up getting into trouble together. When our parents divorced, life became difficult. But we made each other one promise that I believed with every part of me. No matter where life took us, we would always have each other's backs. Looking back now, I realized that promise meant everything to me, and absolutely nothing to him. In the spring of 2013, I accepted a financial analyst position in Dubai. It wasn't the destination I had dreamed about, but the salary was nearly 3 times what I was earning in Chicago. My plan was simple: work overseas for 2 or 3 years, save enough money for a house, come back home, and finally build the future I had been chasing since college. Before leaving, I packed almost everything I owned into a storage unit, but I didn't feel comfortable leaving my birth certificate, social security card, tax records, passport copies, and other legal documents inside a locker. So I handed them to the one person I trusted more than anyone else in the world: my younger brother. Michael laughed, locked everything inside a small safe in his apartment, and promised that nothing would happen to them until I came home. I thanked him, hugged him goodbye at O'Hare Airport, and boarded my flight believing I had just made the smartest decision of my life. I couldn't have been more wrong. Dubai changed me in ways I never expected. I worked harder than I ever had before, earned promotions faster than I imagined, and slowly built the kind of financial stability I had always dreamed about. Every Christmas, Michael called to check on me. Every birthday, he remembered to send a message before anyone else. Sometimes he'd even send photos of our old neighborhood in Chicago, telling me that nothing had really changed and joking that the Cubs still couldn't win when it mattered. If someone had asked me back then who I trusted most in this world, I wouldn't have hesitated for a second. I would have said my brother. Looking back now, I realize every phone call wasn't about staying close. It was about making sure I stayed away. When my 10-year contract finally ended, I flew home with more than just luggage. I had enough savings to buy my first home outright, help Michael start the business he'd always talked about, and finally enjoy the life we'd both imagined when we were kids. I even bought him a Rolex at the Dubai airport because I wanted to surprise him for standing by me all those years. I had absolutely no idea that while I was choosing a gift for my brother, he had spent an entire decade stealing my future. 3 days after arriving in Chicago, I walked into my old bank to reopen the checking account I had closed before moving overseas. The woman behind the counter greeted me politely, asked for my driver's license and social security number, and started typing. At first everything seemed normal. Then her fingers stopped moving. She frowned at the screen, typed my social security number again, and glanced at me with a look I couldn't quite understand. Without saying a word, she excused herself and disappeared into the branch manager's office. 5 minutes later, the manager himself came out, introduced himself, and politely asked if we could continue the conversation somewhere private. I honestly thought they were trying to sell me an investment account. Instead, he closed the office door, sat across from me, and asked a question that didn't make any sense. "Mr. Carter, when were you released?" I laughed because I genuinely believed he was talking to someone else. "Released from what?" I asked. He didn't smile. Instead, he slowly turned his monitor toward me. Everything on the screen belonged to me. My full name, my birthday, my social security number, even the address where I grew up. But underneath that information was a criminal history I had never seen before. Credit card fraud, wire fraud, identity theft, federal tax violations, more than $400,000 in unpaid debt, 3 civil judgments, an active federal investigation. I remember staring at the screen for what felt like forever. My first thought wasn't fear. It was confusion. None of it made sense. I handed him my passport, my employment records from Dubai, 10 years of tax returns, immigration documents, apartment leases, everything I could think of. He spent several minutes comparing every document before leaning back in his chair. Then he quietly said something I'll never forget. "Mr. Carter, either someone has stolen your identity on a scale I've never seen before, or you're the most convincing innocent man I've met in 25 years of banking." I walked out of that bank feeling like I no longer existed. Somewhere in Chicago, another Daniel Carter had spent 10 years borrowing money, signing contracts, committing crimes, and destroying a reputation that legally belonged to me. The only question left was, who had access to every document needed to pull something like that off? By the time I reached my rental car, I already knew the answer. I just wasn't ready to admit it. I sat inside my rental car for nearly an hour without turning the engine on. My hands were still resting on the steering wheel, but my mind kept replaying one memory over and over again. Before leaving Chicago, I had handed every important document I owned to exactly one person. My younger brother. Michael had my birth certificate, my social security card, copies of my passport, old tax records. Everything someone would need to become me. I kept telling myself there had to be another explanation. Maybe my documents had been stolen from his apartment. Maybe someone hacked my information. Maybe this entire nightmare was just an unbelievable coincidence. But the harder I tried to convince myself, the more impossible those explanations sounded. I called Michael 3 times before he finally answered. He sounded relaxed, almost cheerful, asking how I was enjoying being back home. I didn't mention the bank. I didn't mention the FBI. I simply told him I wanted to see him. He laughed and suggested dinner the following evening at our favorite steakhouse near downtown Chicago, the same place where we used to celebrate birthdays with our father. His voice never changed, not even for a second. If he was hiding something, he was doing a remarkable job pretending everything was normal. Before hanging up, he reminded me not to forget the watch I had bought him in Dubai. That sentence stayed with me long after the call ended. Somehow, hearing him get excited about an expensive gift while my entire life was falling apart made me feel sick. That evening, instead of going back to my hotel, I drove to the address where Michael had been living for the past 6 years. I didn't intend to confront him. I just wanted to clear my head, maybe convince myself that I was overreacting. But the moment I turned onto his street, I realized something didn't add up. Parked in front of his house were 2 luxury vehicles worth well over $200,000 combined. A black Range Rover and a brand new Mercedes S-Class. Michael had spent most of his adult life working warehouse jobs and delivery routes. Even if he had somehow doubled his income after I left, there was simply no realistic way he could afford a house like this, let alone 2 luxury cars. I parked across the street and watched for a few minutes. A woman stepped outside carrying grocery bags, while 2 children ran across the front yard laughing. Michael walked out behind them, kissed the woman on the forehead, picked up one of the kids, and smiled like the happiest man in America. For a brief moment, I almost felt guilty for suspecting him. Maybe he'd started a successful business. Maybe life had simply worked out better than I knew. Then I noticed the mailbox beside the driveway. It read, Daniel Carter. I felt every drop of blood drain from my face. Michael wasn't pretending to be someone else. He wasn't hiding behind a fake identity. He had been living as me. I couldn't stop staring at that mailbox. My own name was sitting there in black metal letters, attached to a house I had never seen before. For a few seconds, I actually wondered if I had walked into the wrong neighborhood. Then Michael opened the front door again, waved goodbye to the kids as they climbed into a school bus and disappeared inside. Nothing about him suggested he was hiding from anyone. He looked comfortable, confident, like a man who had been living this life for years. I pulled out my phone and took a picture of the mailbox, then another of the 2 luxury cars in the driveway. I knew walking across the street and confronting him would accomplish nothing. If I accused him without proof, he'd deny everything, and I'd lose whatever advantage I still had. Instead, I drove straight to a hotel and spent the rest of the night doing something I hadn't done in years. Searching public records, property records, business registrations, court filings, credit databases. By 2 o'clock in the morning, I realized the situation was even worse than the bank manager had described. My name wasn't connected to one business. It was connected to 5. There was a construction company, a real estate investment LLC, 2 commercial vehicle loans, and several lines of credit that together exceeded $600,000. Whoever had been signing those documents wasn't pretending to be Daniel Carter anymore. According to every public database I searched, he was Daniel Carter. Then I found something that made my stomach tighten. One of the companies had filed a lawsuit against a supplier only 3 weeks earlier, which meant someone had appeared in court very recently using my name. The next morning, I canceled dinner with Michael. I texted him, apologized, and blamed jet lag. He replied almost immediately, saying it wasn't a problem and that we could meet over the weekend instead. His response bothered me more than I expected. If your brother returned home after 10 years and suddenly canceled your first dinner together, most people would ask if everything was okay. Michael didn't. It almost felt as if he preferred keeping me at a distance. That afternoon, I drove to the Cook County Courthouse and requested copies of every civil case connected to my name. Most of the files were exactly what I expected: loan disputes, unpaid debts, business contracts. But one document stopped me cold. Attached to a lawsuit filed only 3 weeks earlier was a certified copy of the plaintiff's driver's license. The name was Daniel James Carter. The date of birth was mine. The address was mine. Even the signature looked almost identical to the one I'd been using since college. The only thing that wasn't mine was the photograph. It was Michael. I sat there staring at the document for several minutes, unable to process what I was seeing. This wasn't a stolen credit card or a fake bank account. My brother had renewed driver's licenses, registered companies, signed mortgage agreements, appeared in court, and built an entire public identity under my name. He hadn't borrowed my life. He had replaced me with himself. As I closed the case file, the court clerk quietly placed another folder on the desk and said there was one more document I might want to see. It was the original mortgage application for Michael's house. At the bottom of the page was the signature of the attorney who had verified my identity before the loan was approved. That attorney was still practicing law in downtown Chicago. For the first time since this nightmare began, I finally had someone who could answer a question that had been haunting me for days. How had my own brother managed to convince an entire legal system that he was me? The law office occupied the entire 22nd floor of a glass building overlooking the Chicago River. Every surface inside reflected money: marble floors, dark walnut walls, framed awards, and a reception area that looked more like a luxury hotel than a legal practice. When I introduced myself and asked to speak with attorney Richard Collins, the receptionist smiled politely before asking whether I had an appointment. I told her I didn't, but I also told her my name. The moment she typed Daniel Carter into her computer, her expression changed. She disappeared through a wooden door without another word. Less than a minute later, a man in his 60s stepped into the lobby, looked directly at me, and said something I wasn't expecting. "Mr. Carter, I thought you were taller." For a second, I wondered if he was joking, but his face remained completely serious. I followed him into his office, closed the door behind me, and placed the certified copy of the driver's license on his desk. He barely looked at it before taking off his glasses and rubbing his forehead. Then he asked the question that confirmed every fear I'd been carrying since I came home. "You're not the Daniel Carter who bought the Lincoln Park property, are you?" I slowly shook my head and handed him my passport, my employment records from Dubai, and my original driver's license that had expired years earlier while I was overseas. He compared every document in silence. When he finally looked back at me, the confidence that had filled the room only moments earlier was gone. He whispered almost to himself, "Dear God, we've been dealing with the wrong Carter for nearly 10 years. I leaned forward and asked him the one question that mattered more than anything else. "How did this happen?" Collins didn't answer immediately. Instead, He unlocked a cabinet behind his desk and removed a thick client file labeled Daniel Carter. It was nearly 4 inches thick. Inside were mortgage applications, tax forms, business contracts, insurance policies, investment agreements, and dozens of notarized signatures. Every single page carried my name. Every signature looked almost identical to mine. Every fingerprint belonged to Michael. Collins closed the file and admitted something that surprised me. He had never met the real Daniel Carter because every legal document had been signed through licensed notaries, remote identity verification systems, and financial institutions that independently confirmed the identification. As far as every bank, every lawyer, every title company, and every government office was concerned, Michael had never claimed to be anyone else. He had simply presented himself as Daniel Carter with documents that appeared completely legitimate. Before I left, Collins stopped me at the door. His voice was calm, but there was genuine concern in it. "Daniel, this isn't just identity theft anymore. If everything in this file is fraudulent, we're looking at one of the largest financial impersonation cases I've ever seen. But there's something you need to understand before you confront your brother. People who build a lie for 10 years don't defend it because they're greedy. They defend it because they've forgotten how to live without it." That sentence stayed with me all the way back to my car. For the first time since returning to Chicago, I wasn't wondering whether Michael had stolen my identity. I was wondering whether he even remembered who he used to be. Michael chose the same steakhouse we had celebrated birthdays in since we were teenagers. He greeted me with a hug, thanked me for the Rolex before I even sat down, and spent the first 20 minutes talking about everything except my return to Chicago. He asked about Dubai, the weather, the food, my apartment, and whether I planned to stay in the United States permanently. I answered every question as calmly as I could while watching him across the table. The strange part wasn't that he looked nervous. He didn't. He looked completely relaxed, as if there wasn't a single secret left in the world capable of frightening him. That confidence bothered me more than anything I had discovered over the previous week. Dinner arrived, but neither of us touched our food. I reached into my briefcase and placed a single photograph on the table. It was the picture I had taken of his mailbox with my name on it. Michael looked down for barely a second before smiling. He pushed the picture back toward me and casually explained that the mailman had mixed up our names years ago and nobody had ever bothered fixing it. It was a convincing answer until I placed a second document beside it. This time it was the certified copy of the driver's license from the courthouse. The smile disappeared. He didn't pick it up. He simply stared at it for several seconds before looking back at me. Neither of us spoke. The silence between us felt heavier than anything either of us could have said. I slowly removed a third document from the folder, then a fourth. Mortgage records, business registrations, tax filings, court appearances. Every page carried my name and his photograph. Michael finally leaned back in his chair, exhaled slowly, and whispered something I never expected to hear. I knew this day would come. He didn't deny a single document. He didn't accuse anyone else. He didn't even try to explain himself. Instead, he closed his eyes for a moment and quietly asked one question. "Before you say anything else, can I tell you how it started?" For the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't looking at a criminal. I was looking at my little brother, and somehow, that made everything even harder. Michael sat there in complete silence for almost a minute before speaking again. When he finally looked at me, I didn't see arrogance or defiance. I saw exhaustion, the kind that builds over years until carrying the truth becomes heavier than carrying the lie. He told me everything began only 3 months after I left for Dubai. Our father had suffered a severe stroke, and because most of his financial accounts had both our names listed as emergency contacts, banks refused to process several urgent transactions without my authorization. International communication wasn't as simple then as it is today, and every delay meant unpaid medical bills, insurance complications, and the possibility of losing the family home. The first signature he forged wasn't for himself, it was mine, on a hospital payment authorization. He admitted that he hated himself for doing it, but he convinced himself it was temporary and necessary. One forged signature became another, then another. A bank employee suggested that updating identification would make future paperwork easier, Someone else accepted the documents without asking too many questions. Every institution assumed another institution had already verified the identity. Months turned into years, and before Michael realized what was happening, Daniel Carter existed in two completely different lives. One was building a career overseas. The other was buying property, opening businesses, borrowing money, and signing contracts back in Chicago. He looked down at his hands before saying the words that stayed with me long after that night ended. I never woke up one morning planning to steal your life. I just kept telling myself I'd fix it tomorrow. Then tomorrow became 10 years. Neither of us spoke for what felt like forever. The waiter came by twice asking if we needed anything else, but neither of us even looked at him. Michael kept staring at the stack of documents between us as if they belonged to someone else's life. Finally, he pushed them back toward me and quietly said he was tired. Not tired of hiding, tired of waking up every morning wondering whether today would be the day everything collapsed. He admitted that after the first forged signature, every bad decision became easier than the one before it. Every year he promised himself he would tell me the truth before I came home. Every year he failed. I asked him one question: "Why didn't you call me?" He looked at me with tears in his eyes and gave me an answer I'll never forget. Because every year that passed made me more ashamed than the year before. At first I thought you'd forgive me. 5 years later, I knew you wouldn't. 10 years later, I couldn't even forgive myself. Those words hurt more than every document I had read. A week later, Michael turned himself in. His attorney negotiated a plea agreement. Several banks recovered part of their losses, and most of the businesses connected to my name were frozen while investigators untangled years of fraudulent records. It took months to repair my credit history, my tax records, and my legal identity. Some things were corrected quickly. Others took years. People often ask me what the hardest part of the whole experience was. It wasn't losing money. It wasn't the FBI investigation. It wasn't spending months proving that I was actually me. The hardest part was realizing that the person who destroyed my life wasn't someone who hated me. It was someone who loved me once and made one terrible decision he never had the courage to undo. A few months after everything was over, I walked into a Social Security office to finish replacing the last of my official documents. The woman behind the counter smiled politely and asked why I needed a completely new identity record after so many years. I looked down at the paperwork, smiled for the first time in months, and answered honestly, "I don't want a new identity. I just want my own life back." I walked out of that building carrying a thin envelope filled with replacement documents. They had finally given me back my name. The one thing no government office, no court, and no piece of paper could ever give back was the 10 years my brother and I had lost forever.